2013, the American CIA finally admitted that it had orchestrated a military coup to overthrow Iran's democratically elected government in 1953. Anglo-American Oil, now British Petroleum, had paid Iran just 17.5% of profits and refused to improve the pay and working conditions of oil workers. So Iran nationalized its oil industry in 1953. As a result, the British conspired with the Americans to oust Iran's popular elected prime minister and reinstalled the same puppet dictator they had anointed after invading Iran in 1941. Western oil companies reclaimed control of Iranian oil production as the United States quietly maintained order in Iran. American control of Iran began in 1941 when the United States provided military aid to allow the British to invade Iran to seize its oil. Britain was broke and could no longer pay Iran royalties on oil production, so decided to steal it. The British joined the Soviets to invade and partition Iran, in the same manner the Germans had joined the Soviets to partition Poland in 1939. The United States pretended it was neutral in this conquest, but massive American military aid made this invasion possible. The official excuse for the invasion was to protect Iran's oil from Germany, even though German forces were far away and lacked the ships or rail access to deploy forces to Iran. Iran's army was quickly overwhelmed by the Allied invasion. Over 800 Iranian troops were killed and thousands wounded. The invasion disrupted Iran's economy and caused food shortages, while Soviet and British troops seized food stocks for their own needs. Iran's leader, Reza Shah Pahlavi, was exiled to South Africa for resisting the invasion. His son was open to serving as a puppet monarch, so accepted the role. The Americans played no direct role in this invasion, but made it possible. Since the British could no longer pay for war materials, American President Franklin Roosevelt manipulated the U.S. Congress to abandon neutrality by providing the British and Soviets with free military and economic aid. This was done with the deceptively named Lend-Lease Act of 1941. The American government leased material, nearly for free, with the absurd notion it would be returned after the war. A total of $50.1 billion, equivalent to $565 billion in 2018, worth of supplies were transferred to American allies during World War II. This was extremely costly to the American people. Americans are taught the war was a glorious time. Yet fuel and food were rationed, wages frozen, and income taxes imposed on working-class Americans. Hungry Americans were told to grow food in their backyards with victory gardens. War production resulted in shortages of tires and shoes. Housing construction and private automobile production were halted. The government sold billions of dollars in war bonds to help fund the war, which burdened the American economy for years after the war. This hardship was imposed by President Roosevelt to support his desire for a massive expansion of the American empire. He is shown here with the American-anointed dictator of Iran in 1943. During World War II, Iran was occupied by some 30,000 American troops. Their mission was to deliver Lend-Lease material to the Soviet Union, but to also train a national police force to control Iran. The United States also provided Lend-Lease war materials to Iran's military and trained its officers. Americans filled key positions in Iran's government, so the nation functioned as a colony of the American empire. After the war ended, most American troops were withdrawn, but thousands of soldiers and civilians remained to advise the Iranian government, military, and police. Problems arose after the war when the Iranians began to protest for democracy, as was required by Iran's 1906 constitution. The Americans insisted that its puppet dictator, known as the Shah of Iran, allow elections so that democracy could thrive. But the Americans had underestimated the anger Iranian people retained from the World War II invasion and the occupation, as well as the looting of Iran's oil reserves. They seemed unaware that Persians have a long, proud history of independence and resent foreign influence. They They elected a government that nationalized Iran's oil industry despite heavy opposition from foreign advisors, so it was overthrown in a coup. The idea of a democratic Iran was discarded, and Iran's oil reserves were divided up for exploitation by American and British oil companies. The Americans created a massive federal police force called the Savak, who spied on Iranians and imprisoned political opponents. Iran was paid royalties and used its oil wealth to rapidly develop the nation. However, much was wasted to create a huge military armed with expensive American weaponry. The Shah's family spent much of this oil wealth on extravagant royal living and invested much of Iran's oil wealth in British and American banks. These factors created great anger among the Iranian people, but the Shah and his American masters were confident they had an iron grip on the nation. However, religious leaders held great influence and organized a campaign to overthrow the Shah. Protests grew larger as the Savak police became more violent. In 1978, protesters overran government offices in Tehran and the symbol of American control, the U.S. Embassy. The Shah fled to Florida, and the Americans were deported. Iran reinstituted democracy and nationalized its oil industry. It declared neutrality during the Cold War and stopped spending billions of dollars each year on American weaponry. The United States declared Iran an enemy and has been trying to overthrow its democratic government ever since.